Good morning, everyone. From my side, a warm welcome to you all. I'm so glad you're here today to join us as we wrap up our series, Neighbouring, and what it truly means to love our neighbors. The great commandment is to love God with everything we are and to love our neighbors as ourselves. Now, in one of these messages, I shared a little bit of when we moved to Cape Town, what is it now, like 7.5 years ago, to start a church. It was a city that we didn't know anyone in, and we had to figure this neighboring thing out because you have no one that you know. There's no even church community. It's just like you arrive in this place and you're on your own. And I shared about some of the awkwardness, right, of having to go to people that you don't know and introduce yourself to them and start a conversation. But what I didn't tell you was how some of those conversations ended. One day we were walking on the promenade, so the strip of park next to the ocean, with my parents-in-law and their dog. They had a little schnauzer. And we get to this park, a part of the park where it's a free running area for the dogs. And their dog starts chasing this little Italian greyhound around. And they're running in circles and they have fun. It looks all cool. But this couple seems like really nervous about it. I'm like, the dogs are just having fun. And finally he grabs his dog and he holds her. And their dog just came out of a second leg that she broke, and thousands of dollars to fix those two legs. And he's going a little crazy about our dog chasing his, and he's like, they're going to break another leg. But they speak Afrikaans, so it's our first language, and we live in a mostly English community. So we start talking to them, and that's a rule of neighboring, right? If God has placed them around you, you love them. So of course, the normal thing to do is when you just meet people is you invite them over for a dinner. I know it's not normal. For us, it was normal. So I was just like, listen, let's meet together and let's eat together. But he's still like frustrated because our dog tried to kill us. Not really, but that's how he saw it, right? And finally, we started getting connected. We started building a relationship about a love for CrossFit. They introduced it to us, a sport. We also got an Italian greyhound. We only knew them. We met them that one time. We knew them like a week, And then we had to fly to New York for 10 days, and we had this little puppy, and we just dropped this puppy off at their place. And we're like, you've got the same dog. You know how to care for them. So take care of our dog for the next 10 days. And it ended up in a relationship after many years where they became incredibly good friends. They used to babysit our dog every Sunday when we had to set up for our church. It was a portable venue, and then when we came back, we would hang out and just talk to them. Later, they joined our church, but it's been the best friends we've ever had in our life. We still video call with them every now and again. We had children, then they had children, and it was just this intertwining of two couples' lives over 6 years. And I think that is what loving our neighbor is all about. Loving our neighbors is not about a to-do list that I have to tick off that I did something. Loving our neighbors is about building relationships with those around us. And today, in the final part of our series, Neighboring, that is our last topic, is building relationships with those around you. We've spoken about the need to love our neighbors and how Jesus meant that as a literal thing, not just as this figurative idea. We've spoken about the barriers we need to overcome. And today we're going to be talking about how to build relationships with those around us. And if you've been here for a while now, you will know that we're reading from the book of Luke. There's four Gospels in the New Testament. A Gospel is a book that describes the life of Jesus while he was on earth. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And we're reading from the book of Luke. And we're going to read the whole section today. So we've broken this up into 3 parts. And today we're going to read the whole thing. So a religious leader wanted to know, what does this mean to love my neighbor? And Jesus then shares a parable. A parable is a story with a deeper spiritual meaning to explain it to him. And today we're going to read the whole thing again and then talk about how we can actually build relationships. So if you don't have a Bible, please stop by at our info desk after the service. We'll give you one, or you can download the Bible app on your phone, but it will also be on the screen so you can follow along. Luke 10 from verse 25. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. So his intentions weren't pure, right? Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus said, what is written in the law? How do you read it? And the man replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. You have answered correctly, Jesus replied. That's a summary of the law. Do this and you will live. But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked, and who is my neighbor? And in reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, they beat him and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So to a Levite, a helper in the temple, when he came to the place and saw the man, he passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, a nation who didn't like the Jewish people, as he traveled, he came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine, and then he put the man on his own donkey and brought him to an inn and took care of him. The next day, he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, that was the money unit. And he told the innkeeper, look after him, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. Now Jesus says this is the conclusion. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? The expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. Jesus told them, go and do likewise. When we talk about loving our neighbors, I think one of the questions that naturally pop up is, but how far does it go, right? Like I think the first week when I preached, people already asked me about but how far does it go? Where do we draw boundaries? And I said, we'll get to that. But how far does it go? Wouldn't it be fine if the priest walked by this man that was half dead, the Levite walked past him, and then the Samaritan comes and he helps him and he washes his wounds with wine as an antiseptic, and then he put the oil on it as a salve, and then he took him to an inn where they could take care of him. Like, where is enough, right? Wasn't that good enough? And today we're going to be talking about it because I think it's easy for us to confuse giving a hand out to someone with actually loving them and building a relationship with them. And I think that is why Jesus didn't just stop and say, the priest walked by, the Levite walked by, but a Samaritan stopped and helped. That could have been the whole parable. It would have still been powerful. But Jesus continued the story because I think he didn't want us to confuse giving a hand out to someone to actually loving our neighbors. So Jesus went further in the story. So last week, if you missed it, we had a bit of a technical hiccup. We decided we are going to load the message onto YouTube, but there's like little gaps in the sound, so you will have to fill in the blanks. It's a fill in the blank Sunday. But last week we spoke about overcoming barriers, like the time barrier, my comfort barrier, things like that, so that I can love my neighbors. But today we're going further because once we have overcome that barriers, how do we actually move to a place where we love them, where we build a relationship with them? And what I want to do is, I want to take this story and look at 2 things that helps to make it really simple for us to build healthy relationships with our neighbors. Very practical today, so hopefully this will make sense to you. I think the first thing that comes up before I even say how to build a relationship is, but doesn't it take a certain kind of person to actually love your neighbors? Doesn't it take an extrovert? Like, I'm an introvert, right? So, not me. That's what you might be thinking. I'm definitely not an introvert. Just in case you were wondering. But doesn't it take an extrovert to be a good neighbor? This week I heard a new one, an ambivert or an omnivert. It is like an extroverted introvert or an introverted extrovert. I'm like, there's all kinds of names. So doesn't it take an extrovert? Or doesn't it take someone who knows how to speak well? Or doesn't it take someone who's got a natural gift for giving or hospitality? Like, doesn't it take a specific kind of person to be a good neighbor? Because it's easy for us to move the burden off of ourselves and say, no, but these people who are good at loving their neighbors, I'm not one of them. I wasn't gifted with being an extrovert. Now, the interesting thing is, we don't read a lot about the Samaritan, right? We know he was a Samaritan. And we know he was on some kind of trip and he would come back. But we don't know if he was rich, if he was poor, if he was an extrovert, if he was an introvert, whatever. Because that's not the point of the story. The point of the parable was this was a pretty ordinary guy who didn't have a responsibility in the eyes of the Jewish people to this man that was beaten up, yet he chose to help him. Yet he made a decision to be available to those that God sent over his path, and yet he decided to invest what he had into the life of this man. So I want to tell you, it doesn't take a superhero to be a great neighbor. So we all, at some point in our lives, wish I was a bit more well-spoken. Or you might wish, maybe, I just wish we had a bigger house or a better house to entertain people in. Or I wish I was more of an extrovert. And you can always wish for stuff and think that if you had that, you would be great at neighboring. But you don't need anything more than what God has already gifted you to love your neighbors, to be a great neighbor. What God has given you already, the time, the talents, the treasure, the whatever you have in your life, I believe is enough to be a great neighbor. And here is the beauty. When we love our neighbors, we're not doing it because it's some kind of humanitarian requirement or because it's a religious law we have to pick up off. We love because Jesus first loved us. And therefore, if this is my obedience to the God who created this universe, shouldn't I then also trust God that if I love my neighbor, that He will use the little bit, the imperfections in my life, the little bit I have to offer, shouldn't I trust Him to make that enough for whatever the needs might be in the lives of my neighbor? I should trust Him. So, where do we start? Okay, and this is going to be simple, but at the same time, I don't want you to think I'm going to give you a perfect tool or a map now to build a relationship, because quite frankly, you can't have an exact tool to build a relationship. They are pretty organic, and it's a relationship, right? But what we can do, although I can't give you a tool, we can create environments in which relationships can flourish. And I think there's 2 steps involved in really loving our neighbors, in building relationships. And the first one was the first thing the Samaritan did when he saw the man lying next to the road. He stopped, he got off his donkey, and he walked over to him. That seems so simple. But let me tell you, if you're not willing to get off your lawnmower, if you're not willing to get out of your car, to get off your porch, to walk across the street, and to just go to where your neighbors are, they will always remain strangers. So our first step is to go from strangers to acquaintance. And it is as simple as asking them for their name. And maybe like, I have missed the boat. I've lived next to my neighbor for 10 years. I still don't know their name. Okay, I'm going to make it simple for you. You walk over and you go like, hey neighbor, we always wave at each other, but I have actually never asked you your name. And I feel so sorry, but like, what's your name? Or if you have asked him the name before, you're like, I know I've asked you 5 times, but I'm not great with names. I always use that excuse, but it's valid, okay? I have short-term amnesia when it comes to names. So you just go like, I forgot your name. Can you just please remind me of your name? At the moment when we're willing to get off of our donkey and walk over to our neighbor, that is the first step of going from stranger to acquaintance. It starts with knowing someone's name. And once you know their name, they're acquaintance. So now, how do we build a relationship? And this is where it's super simple, but it gets a little trickier. Once the Samaritan got off of his donkey, what was his next step? He didn't leave the man there. He took what he had, the wine, the oil, his compassion, and he took care of the man. Then he didn't leave that there. He loaded him onto his donkey and he took him to an inn and he booked him into the inn and he said, please take care of him while I go about my business and I'll come back to take care of him again. So the second step, if we want to move from acquaintance to a relationship, I believe, is to give what we have to the relationship. And that lies, I think, mostly on 2 levels. The first thing, each and every one of us that we have to give is conversation. It's talking to other people. So after getting off the donkey, after introducing yourself to this person and getting to know their name, the next step is to start having a conversation with them. Talk about their car, talk about the great lawn or the lawn that's not so great, and tell them you'll come and help and clean it up, whatever it might be, right? Allow them to share their stories. We live in a world where very few people actually allow dialogue anymore. Mostly we use conversations wherein to share our own stories. And I'm a preacher, guys. This is hard for me, okay? I like talking, if you didn't know. But you have to stop yourself and be willing to listen to your neighbor's story. And in church planting, we find it so often when we get to know people and we say like, hey, share your story. And they will go, this is the first time in years that anyone has asked me about my life. I'm like, what has gone wrong, right? So allow them to share their stories and you start sharing your stories, but have a conversation. And then make sure to follow up on it. The first one might be short, but then go and follow up on a conversation, because there's nothing as bad as someone telling you that they are in a bad and a broken place. And next time when you meet, you go like, hey neighbor, hope you're still doing good. He's like, I was just lying next to the road, like telling you I'm broken. And guys, sadly that happens, right? Where we say like, oh, I'll pray for you. And then we never think about it again. In our small groups, in our grace groups at Grace Church, we take time every week to hear everyone's highs and lows, things we celebrate together and things we pray for. And we've made it more and more of a habit in our groups to say, next week, follow up on those. Because if someone shares something vulnerable in their life, if they share with you that they're struggling with depression, if they share with you that they've lost a loved one, if they share with you that they have marriage problems, you need to respond back to that. Ask them how it's going. Ask them how you can help. So first step is have a conversation and follow up on that conversation. And if you're like, Louis, but that's uncomfortable, man. Like, what if someone shares something I don't want to hear? I'm like, too bad. Deal with it. That's what Jesus did. In Luke, we read, he called a disciple, a man that would become his disciple, called Levi. He was a tax collector, people who were known for their dishonesty. And after he called him, do you know what Levi did? He hosted a party. And Jesus goes to this party, and Jesus hangs out with these people, and Jesus talks with them. And they share stuff that's uncomfortable and that's broken, to the extent where the religious leaders call Jesus a drunk just because Jesus hanged out with these people. Because Jesus cared about these people and listened to their stories. People try to down-talk Jesus because of it. And if we are truly followers of Jesus, we need to become comfortable with uncomfortable conversations. And so like, I'm going to love people the way Jesus loved me, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's hard. So if you want to build a relationship, first get to know someone's name. Secondly, start the conversation. And thirdly, we continue doing what the Samaritan did. We share what we have. He had oil and wine and a donkey, and he shared that. Maybe you love baking. I know some of you love baking because I've eaten some of your sweet treats, and it's not good for my health, but I still like it, okay? But if you're good at baking, there's no neighbor on earth that doesn't appreciate the nice pie at the front door, right? Maybe you are good at lawns, and your neighbor sucks at lawn care, and you go over and you say like, hey man, can I help you out? Maybe you are good at working on cars, and your neighbor is struggling with his, and you walk over and you say, can I help you? Maybe you're good at math and your classmate at school struggles with it, and you're like, why don't we do homework together after school and I help you? Maybe you just invite them over for dinner because you're not a bad cook. And if you are a bad one, just order pizza. That's fine. But share the things that you already have in your life. And you might want to assume, it's easy to assume that our neighbors won't want to participate, or that they are too busy. But you will be surprised, because there's plenty of people all around us that's hungry for interaction. We live in a world that's isolated and lonely. We just got new neighbors. And the first time I saw them in the backyard, Yolanda and I, and of course Abigail was in the mix. If you know my daughter, she's an extrovert. We started talking to them, and we just said hi and where they're from. And he's from Australia, so we share like opposite seasons to North America and all of those. So we had some things to talk about. And then we dropped something off at the front door to say, welcome to the neighborhood. The second time we see them, do you know what I did? I did the normal thing. I invited them over or I said, I will invite you over for dinner. But I wasn't sure if it is the normal thing in Canada. Okay, so I didn't invite him. I just said, hey man, we would love to have you over for dinner at some point to just get to know you. Is that okay? And he said, we'll love to. I'm like, who knew? They actually want to get to know their neighbors, right? Like it's that easy. So share what you have. This is the principle. You build relationships with neighbors by investing in the relationship with what you have. You don't need to be a special kind of person. You don't need special something. Just invest with what you have. That's a simple thing the Samaritan did, and it was enough. And if you feel like you don't have enough to offer, I want to tell you, if you are willing to share the little bit you have in obedience to Jesus, I believe that our God is capable of multiplying whatever you have for your own needs and to help your neighbors out. So don't worry about it in the moment, but trust Him and start that relationship. So how do we start it again? Let's go through it. From stranger to acquaintance, get to know their name. From acquaintance to relationship, share what you have. That's conversation and that's whatever you have, right? But the question that people have asked me is, where do I draw a line? What does a healthy boundary look like with my neighbor? Now, the interesting thing about the Samaritan is he was interruptible. He stopped his trip to take care of this man. But he didn't change his whole life completely, right? He still continues on his trip because he drops this man off at an inn. He says, take care of him, and I will come back for him later. So there was some healthy boundaries in place. And I think there is two specific places in which we get confused as to where to draw the lines. And the first one, I think, is when it comes to my Christian responsibility of sharing Jesus. That's the first boundary that I sometimes struggle with. Like, how do I know when I should share him? Like, how much I should share? What if I say something and they find it offensive? Like, should I, shouldn't I? Like, where's that line? And I also want to call that the motive for my relationship. The second boundary that we struggle with as a neighbor are about practical things. What is my responsibility in this relationship? So I want to talk about these two quickly, and I hope that it gives you a bit of an idea. But the first one is the motive boundary. What is my motive for this relationship? And I think there is two equally wrong perspectives in Christianity when it comes to our motives for our relationships. The one is that I just love people and I have no responsibility about sharing Jesus. The other one is that I love them in order to share the relationship with Jesus. And if they don't accept Jesus, I'm out because it had one specific purpose and that was it. And I think both of them are equally wrong. In the book To Transform a City, Swanson and Williams, they use these two illustrations to describe our motives for building relationships. On the one hand side, they say our motive can be an ulterior motive. On the other hand side, it can be an ultimate motive. An ulterior motive means that something is intentionally concealed or hidden. I intentionally conceal the fact that I'm in this relationship to share Jesus with you. It is manipulative, it is wrong, it is not honest, right? Sharing the gospel with people should not be our ulterior motives. And guys, people see through it like this. While I was studying in university, I had a Christian band that played in clubs and all kinds of places to share Jesus with people who were lost and broken. I was a youth pastor and I was studying theology full time. And on my way to a class where I had a test coming up that I haven't studied for, so I've got like 15 minutes on my way there to study, a guy stops me that was probably with some of the campus ministries. And he starts talking to me about something, and we kind of get talking. And the next moment he's busy trying to convert me to Christianity. I'm like, that's literally my life. Like everything I'm about. And I was offended by his remarks. It is not nice when you feel like someone is manipulating a situation to force something down your throat. If you've ever been there, you will know what it feels like. So we don't have an ulterior motive of sharing the gospel. But our ultimate motive means that it's the furthest point in the journey. It is a longed-for destination. So at the end of the day, there's a longed-for destination in this relationship. I don't know when it's going to come, but there's this longed-for destination that I want to share the incredible life change that Jesus brought in my life with other people. In the book, The Art of Neighbouring, they say it so nicely. They say, we don't love our neighbors to convert them. We love our neighbors because we are converted. You see, we love our neighbors because Jesus loved us. Doesn't matter who they are. It doesn't matter what they believe. Like, I have a mandate, we said last week or the week before that, to love. That's it, full stop. So I love my neighbors because that is what Jesus wants of me. He didn't add footnotes and say, love them if they are willing to follow me, or love them if they live like you, or love them if they're not Pharisees, or love them if whatever the blank is. He said, love them as yourself. So we want to love our neighbors. And therefore, sharing Jesus with our neighbors is not an ulterior motive. It's not something that I sneak in or that I have this idea that I'm just going to be your friend in order to share Jesus. I love my neighbors because I love them, and that's what Jesus asked of me. But I've got an ultimate motive of saying, like, I want each and every person I care about to experience the beauty of life with Jesus. So how do we do it? And this is actually pretty simple. We really want to share what we love and enjoy and believe with people closest to us. And we naturally do that. Think about any relationship. If you really know someone, 10 minutes in a conversation, and you guys are talking about sports or about a hobby or about something that you are passionate about. You don't manipulate it. You don't search for opportunity. It just comes out because we naturally talk about the stuff that we are passionate about. And I want to tell you, the more you and I love Jesus, the more that love, His love, will become apparent in our conversations. The more His love will become visible in the way we interact with other people. Let me say it in a different way, and this might be a harder thing for you to hear. And especially want this if you grew up in a Christian home and you've been a Christian for a long time. I want you to hear this. If you're Canadian, I want you to hear this because we have the unofficial rule of not talking about our faith, right? If you're not talking to people closest to you, people you love, people that you have relationships with, if you are not talking with them about Jesus, it's one of two problems. One, you might not have a very good relationship with them. You're not really in a relationship, so you guys can't speak about the stuff you're passionate about. Or two, you don't have a very deep relationship with Jesus. So He's not the passion that naturally comes up in your conversations. God's story isn't forced. If you have a relationship with Jesus, He's living out His story through us, and it will come up naturally in our conversation. And that is the beauty of actually neighboring. You don't need to memorize pictures. You don't need to have like this master plan for evangelizing your neighborhood or have all of these perfect verses memorized in your back pocket to bring out if someone wants to know about what you believe. You can just love them. And if you actually love Jesus and you're passionate about Him, it will come out in your conversations naturally. If you love God with everything you are and you love your neighbor as yourself, the rest will fall into place by itself. That's it. It will happen. So don't worry too much about how much you can share or when you can share. Build a relationship and the opportunity will open itself. But then the second thing is the responsibility boundary. And I think that's a question that a lot of people had is like, what is a healthy boundary? Now, a boundary, think of it as a fence between two properties. And that fence tells me what stuff I'm responsible for and what stuff my neighbor is responsible for, right? This side of the lawn, I have to cut this grass. That side, that's my neighbor's problem. Unless you're a nice neighbor, you'll cut a little of his as well, right? But boundaries define the terms of what's allowable in a relationship. So here's how I see it. Here's, I think, a healthy way to look at it. And that is, as a good neighbor, you're responsible to a person, not for a person. Okay? You're responsible to a person, not for a person. Being responsible to someone is healthy. So I'm responsible to love them. I'm responsible to encourage them. I am responsible to bless them. I'm responsible to pray for them. I'm responsible to serve them. The stuff God asked me to do and that we often neglect. That's what I'm responsible to them. Being responsible for people is unhealthy. I cannot be responsible for their well-being, for their health, for their finances, for the happiness of their marriage, for the success or the failure of their business, for their spiritual growth. The Bible says it's God's job, right? And I have to share. I'm not responsible for the outcomes, the consequences, the emotions, reactions, feelings of someone else's choices. The Samaritan gave a hand, but not a handout. He had a limit as to how far he would go. So he helped this man. He put him on a donkey, but he said, I still have a life to give. I'm not responsible for you. I'm responsible to you. So he helped him, and then he booked him into the inn, and he said, take care of him so that I can continue my business. But because I'm building a relationship, I'll come back for this man. But that was a healthy boundary where he empowered that man through his act of kindness to be able to move forward. The hardest part of loving our neighbors, if you take it serious, if you actually want to live this law of God, I think the hardest part of it is knowing where to draw the line. Because I can always give more, I can always serve more, I can always help more, I can always love more. But you can't be everything to everyone. So remember two things. It's not about what you do, but about what attitude you do it with. And the second thing is ask God for guidance. Because if this is us, not just loving our neighbors because we think it's the right thing to do, but loving our neighbors because that's what Jesus asked of us and because He loved us first, then trust Him to guide you how to love. Rely more on His Holy Spirit. Don't just try to do it in your own strength, but trust in His Holy Spirit to show you where you're crossing that line of being responsible to a person versus being responsible for them. Then I want to close with the last two verses in this piece that we read. At the end of this, Jesus goes back to the lawman. Guy who wanted to define loving your neighbors to such a little box that he could just love the people he wanted to love. And Jesus said, no, it looks a little different. It's actually the people around you, and it's actually caring about them, and it's actually building a relationship with them. So then at the end of the story, he says, so which one was the neighbor? And this lawman has to think about it and acknowledge to himself that maybe I've been a Pharisee, maybe I've been a priest, maybe I've been a Levite, maybe I've not been living this out the way Jesus has asked. And he says, this Samaritan, he was the guy who actually lived it out. And Jesus' answer is simple. Now go and do it. Go and do it. This is not about theory. This is about putting what Jesus said into action in our lives. Now, I know your schedule is packed, and I know the idea of becoming a good neighbor sounds scary and impractical. But the journey begins when you choose a lifestyle of conversation and community over busyness and accumulation. So neighboring is basically this. It's about making room for and choosing to befriend those that God has placed around us. And although today was super practical on how to build a relationship and how to set healthy boundaries, let me make it even simpler for you. This community is your training ground. Okay, they are already around you. So these are the people that's supposed to be easy to love. Christians aren't always that easy to love, but they're supposed to be. So have grace with each other, okay? But practice here. So I said last week as well, don't just run out after the service or show up here at the last minute before it starts. Come in early, stay late, drink coffee, connect with people, go to someone you don't know, introduce yourself, hang out. Join a team that you can serve on, because we are like family when we serve together. Join a grace group. That's like 8 to 10 people that you can love. That's pretty normal, most of the time pretty easy to love. Okay, so it's like diapers. If you're a parent, you will know it starts easy and it gets worse. By the time they start eating solids, it's bad, right? If God just threw you in there, it's like you'll never touch a diaper in your life. You'll just leave your baby. So He starts out easy. The same with our relationships. It starts out easy in our grace group. So start there. We have 136 people in grace groups. Now, 36. My mind works great. 136 people in grace groups. We've been busy for 3 semesters. We started last year, September. We just started more groups. We've got 40 places to sign up. That will put us at almost 180 people. So after the service, walk out of here. There's a table on your right with grace group sign-ups. Pastor Wynn will be there to talk you through any questions you might have. But if you look around in this room, 40 places is not that many. So don't wait. You've got this week and next week to sign up. But make sure to sign up and get in a group where you can love people. And then lastly, I already encourage you to get to know the names of your neighbors. So hopefully you've done it. If you haven't, you're 3 weeks behind. It's time to catch up. But if you know the names, you're an acquaintance. It's time to start building a relationship. So this week, go to one of your neighbors. If you are Canadian, you will know if it's appropriate or not to invite them for dinner or lunch, so then do it. If you're unsure if it's appropriate, do what I did and say, I want to invite you, and hear the response, okay? And then work from there. But start this week to build a relationship. Let's pray. Jesus, thank you that you first loved us, and that from your love, we learn how to love those around us. Jesus, I must confess, I haven't always been great at that. Being busy and driven, I so often miss just loving those that you've placed around me. And I pray, Jesus, that this incredible commandment that you gave us to love God with everything we are and to love our neighbors as ourselves, I pray that it will become a natural passion and a natural expression of our love for you. That we will find it easier and easier to love those around us. And we would truly be salt and light in this world. That we will truly be people who are known to make a difference. That people will see Jesus in the love that we have for others. And so I pray that you will multiply every relationship we have. I pray that you would give us incredible opportunities to naturally share what Jesus has done in our lives. And I pray that through our simple acts of loving our neighbors, that many people would find the beauty, the joy, the love, the forgiveness that is to be found in Jesus Christ. I pray it in Jesus' name. Amen.